Alrighty, well, thank you very much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking at SAFRICON 2017. I was at SAFRICON last year when it was held at the Free Market Foundation in Johannesburg, and I had a fantastic time listening to the speakers there. Before I begin with my presentation, I'd just like to give a brief introduction to myself for those of you who don't know me. And I'm a staff writer at the Rational Standard. I began writing at the Rational Standard at the end of the year 2015. And it's been really amazing to see our little website, started by a bunch of students, grow into, I would go so far as to say, is like the South African libertarian place where you can get your articles published. And we've coordinated. We've even had criticism from some really crazy lefties in the media, which is just great. You know, when the people who are stupid hate you, it's a really good sign. I took the local coordinator course with Students for Liberty to become a local coordinator, and I'm trying to get it up and running at Rhodes University. Currently I'm wearing my red socks, and that's because my first year at Rhodes I was at Joe Slovo House. That was the name of my residence, who, as we all know, was a prominent libertarian. In any case, I'm also an avid lover of South Africa's wildlife and our nature, and since living in the Eastern Cape, Rhodes is in Grahamstown, which is a pretty small town and quite rural Eastern Cape. I got to become friends with a guy who lived on a game farm, and it gave me a whole new view on conservation and hunting, and I say hunting for a good reason, which I'll show you why now. But I attempt to show you how I think we can build a framework, a business-orientated framework to save South Africa's wildlife. So this is my friend Melt. He lives on a game farm about 30 kilometers from Grahamstown, in between Salem and Alexandria, if you guys have ever heard of that. And that's him with a red lechwe. And, I don't know what the feelings are when you look at a picture like this. You just see a guy with a dead animal. It's a beautiful one. Maybe you feel sad. Maybe you feel this is a horrible moral outrage, as some people who I've met online think it is. And so, think of your feelings for that picture. And then you see this, which is a really, I'm sorry, just a little trigger warning. There are a lot of these kinds of pictures coming up in the slideshow. And I think the problem that we have right now is that we see picture A and picture B and we think, well, these are both equally bad. Anytime we kill an animal is bad. And I think we simply do not understand how the business model of game farms and conservation works. So I'd like to attempt to explain that a little bit in my slideshow. So, first of all, South Africa, what's going on? South Africa has got some really amazing natural resources which we should be aware of. The first thing is that the country has got very, very diverse topography and biomes, from the deserts of the Northern Cape to the tropical regions of KZN, the Lowveld, this Cape Town, Western Cape region, which is kind of like Mediterranean Europe, to the sort of garden route, which is very temperate, to the Eastern Cape. We have a really a wide range of ecological biomes, if that's the right term, I'm not sure. And massive biodiversity. South Africa is one of the mega diverse countries along the same, in the same league with places like China and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Brazil. And little South Africa is with all of those. So they're really, we need to, and yeah, just a few of the numbers of species that we've got. So we really have some quite amazing natural resources in this country. Okay, so now what? How can I make some money off this? It's the logical, libertarians. It's the next question we need to answer this question. So I want to just talk about, the business of running a game farm. How does this work, basically? So there are 4 ways at present which a guy like Melt living on a little game farm in the Eastern Cape is going to make money. The first one could be for safari or tourism. Now this is more akin to what we know about conservation and the game life of South Africa. As you go to the Kruger Park and you get in your 4x4 and you drive around and you observe the game. And if that's not your type of thing, maybe you think that sounds a bit strange, but it's something I've been doing at least once a year since I was very young, and it's really beautiful to observe wild animals in their natural habitat. So that is a big money maker, and you can infuse that with hospitality, and you attract tourists. And South Africa is very unique in this regard because we're one country in Africa which is relatively stable. There's no civil war going on here. We've got a relatively well-developed economy. Our infrastructure comparatively is really quite excellent. So South Africa is in a really good position when it comes to that. And so this is actually a wonderful generator of revenue and a great way to attract tourists to South Africa. The second thing is breeding, and this is what Melt does as the primary source of income on his farm. Effectively, Melt's farm, it's a small one, and what he does there is he fosters an environment where these animals can breed and multiply, and eventually the idea is that you would buy and sell with other game farms, and in so process make money. And Melt might, he might buy the buck A or buck B, and he knows that the one is a male and one is a female, and they've got good genetics, and they'll breed a few calves, and then he can sell them off to Addo, and then Addo has more of sable, antelope, or roan, or whatever that they want. And it's a sort of a buying and a trading game. It's almost like the stock exchange of wildlife. You can think about it like that. but it is actually really wonderful, because it's in this process of breeding animals and selling them to more commercial farms that we increase the numbers of them. And so that is a wonderful thing for conservation, actually. And it's little farms like Melt's farm out in the Eastern Cape that really do a big job when it comes to saving the species. So hunting is another thing. Now, hunting is where it gets controversial, because this is something people are against. I did not think I believed my eyes when I saw Jim Jeffries, who's a very funny but extremely offensive Australian comedian, making jokes about how he thought hunters were like the worst people ever, or something along those lines. I can't remember what it was, and I think there's just a severe misunderstanding of hunting. Why do people living on game farms hunt? Well, there's basically two reasons. There's sustainability. Now, I'll give an example. Suppose you have one herd of springbok on your farm. And, let's not say springbok. Let's say any kind of animal in which there is a husbandry system where there's one male and a whole harem of females, because that is how it sometimes works in the animal kingdom. If another male was to come to that herd, it might start fighting with the original one, and they'd naturally get into a bit of a war about who was the alpha male, and they might die. One might die, or the other might die, and maybe the breeding won't happen. So there are all these variables when you come down to breeding, that sometimes hunting becomes a necessary tool in order to sustainably manage the herds. And so it's not a bad thing, and when game farmers hunt on their farms, they're only doing so in order to maximize, the numbers of animals that they get. And I assure you, there is none of this sort of malicious mowing down animals with a machine gun as this, like what people in Sea Point would love to have you believe. And I'm just assuming they're from Sea Point. I don't know. So that is the first thing to notice, is that people who have game on their farms really do care about this game because it makes them money. Naturally, you're going to care about your assets. Okay, so the second reason is obviously revenue, and this is, I put that arrow there because it's combined with sustainability. Now, one thing which is happening a little bit in South Africa now is you get these rich Europeans, often from Eastern European countries, who are hunting enthusiasts, and they'll come down to a little farm like Melt's one in the Eastern Cape, and they'll maybe shoot a few, and they've got some trophies and stuff like that. But obviously the buck that they'll shoot will have been selected by the farm owner for sustainability purposes. Maybe it's a really old buck whose teeth are ground down and it can't feed itself anymore, and it's just going to starve to death because there are no natural predators on this farm. So they always make good decisions when it comes down to these things. And these Europeans, I know Melt in his case, he had a few Lithuanians come and hunt on this farm, are willing to pay big bucks because we have some really amazing animals, some really beautiful ones here, and they get trophies to take back with them. Now, the thing to notice about this, if anybody's thinking maybe there's a bit of an ethical problem here with shooting for trophies, that's always something that's very controversial. You have to consider that the revenue that these farmers are getting is going to go back into the farm so that there are even more animals. And that's the key thing I want to point out here. So, as I mentioned, animal products is the other one. Whenever there's hunting, you've obviously got a massive carcass, and they'll often sell for some meat and skin, although it's really sort of marginal hunting, as I mentioned there. And it comes down to this, the bottom line. Conservation, game farming is really just like any other business. It is within the interests of the game farmer to run his or her in a farm, I left out the word farm there, in a sound, ethical manner. Any revenue made from the farm will ultimately be reinvested back into the farm, and more profits equal more products. Now, when your products are an endangered species, this can be very important. So let's talk about rhinos. Rhinos is obviously the thing which encapsulate a lot of South Africans. Personally, as someone who's been going to the Lowveld at least once a year for as far back as I can remember, I've witnessed the decline in the rhino populations from the number of times we've been seeing them. I saw a rhino in the wild last year for the first time, I think in about 5 years. And it does go to show. So the rhinos are certainly a thing to keep in mind here. So, a little bit about the rhinos. Currently there are 5 extant species alive today. So the 2 in Africa and Southern Africa, the black rhino and the black rhino and the white rhino. And then there are 3 that exist in Asia. In Indonesia, there's the Javan and Sumatran rhino, and the population of those 2 is like really small, just a few hundred, and they're now isolated to a very small area. And then there's the Indian rhino, which exists in 1 or 2, or a couple of game reserves in Assam state in India, which is the one on the far east of India. All but the white rhino and the Indian rhino are critically endangered. And South Africa has about 80% in terms of pure numbers of the world's rhino population. So we play a big role here. South Africa is very important when it comes to rhinos. Here's just a few pictures. The Indian rhino on the top left, I believe that's the Javan rhino. I get confused between them. Okay, I don't want to say something incorrect, but black rhino and white rhino on the bottom. So here's just a thing from the WWF, the rhino statistics. As you can see, it wasn't too bad prior to 2006, 2007, 2008. 30, 80, maybe 83 sounds like a lot killed, but relative to what's going on right now, it's really peanuts. And as we can see, 2009, that's kind of where we get a bit of a jump. It goes up to 122, and then all the way 2014, over 1,000 rhinos were poached, which is really quite extraordinary. The thing to notice here is that in 2009, in response to a bit of a wave of poaching of rhinos in South Africa, this is when the government put a moratorium on the sale of rhino horn domestically. And then internationally, there is an international agreement from a group called CITES. That's an acronym I can't, or cities or something, an acronym I can't actually remember, which makes it illegal to trade rhino horn internationally. So that's what happened. They criminalized it in 2009, and that was the results. And then here's just a bit of a more detailed graph. And we can really see from the year 2000, right up to 2007, it was marginal. I mean, less than, not even above 30 one time, which is nothing compared to what we're getting now. And it's all spiked up. And as you can see, here's the sort of distribution between the provinces. And now sandparks is the government-run wildlife authority that owns places like Kruger, and a large majority of those are in sandparks because a large majority of the rhinos are in game reserves owned by sandparks. And part of the reason for this is that due to the price of rhino now, poachers have been going to such extremes that it's now become a security risk to keep a rhino on your farm, because poachers are now taking guns and things like this and flying in helicopters. So if you're a guy like Meltz living on his tiny little family farm in the Eastern Cape and you have a rhino and you've got your family living on this farm, is it going to be worth it having the risk of having poachers with guns, come and attack you guys? Well, this is now the problem. It's created a societal problem in terms of game farmers keeping rhinos. Scarcity kills. This is a little syllogism taken roughly from Davy Ruurt's book. Post 2009, the rhino horn price skyrocketed to about 720,000 Rand per kilogram. One rhino has about 6 kilograms of rhino horn when fully grown. A rhino costs about 250,000 Rand, assuming you have a farm to keep it on. A dead rhino with its horn is now worth 17.3 times more than a live one. So that is the real issue right here. There's no incentive anymore to keep rhinos except for personal reasons, but economically it's just become dangerous, and for poachers, it's now almost worth the risk because it's just worth so much money. So that is so anyway, why legalize commercial trade in rhino horn? The reasons I would put it here at the end. So to provide a stable, legal, non-violent, non-criminal supply of horns to meet the demand and so lower the equilibrium price. The demand for rhino horn comes from 2 areas in particular. The one is Southeast Asia, in particular Vietnam, where it's used for medicinal purposes. And besides that, in Yemen, they use them as ornaments or the handles on daggers. And now, to my knowledge, African countries had actually been supplying these parts of the world with rhino horns for many years quite sustainably, because you don't have to kill a rhino to take its horn. You can just cut it above the bloodline, because the horn is only made out of keratin. Unfortunately, when poachers get there, they usually take a chainsaw and they just hack the thing off and the animal bleeds to death. It's a really cruel thing, but if we had them legalized to be sold on farms, then farmers who want to protect their animals would be able to do it safely and in a more humane way. This would provide a significant extra income source for farmers. And once again, we just have to consider that when farmers get more money, they're going to put that money into their business. So this extra income is ultimately going to fund conservation. It sounds quite funny, but we're going to be selling rhino horn to fund saving the rhinos. And you need to think about it like this. Obviously, the numbers will then increase of rhinos because it'll now be attractive to keep rhinos on your farm. And like I said earlier, the horns can be harvested safely and in a humane manner, so as not to harm the animal. Yeah, just the last slide. We're never going to save the rhino unless it becomes more worthwhile having rhinos alive than dead. The conservation business is literally like any other one. Regardless of what some might say, there is nothing wrong with this. There is nothing wrong with saving something by business. I'll never forget an argument I had with a guy, and I explained this whole argument as to why I wanted rhino horn to be legalized, and his response was, well, if you're going to be making money off the animal, that's morally wrong in itself, and you shouldn't do that. So I said, okay, I suppose you're all right with extinction then. Sometimes the best solutions are the most counterintuitive ones. It just seems so right that if the problem is these damn poachers killing the rhinos to get the horn, that we should crank down on poachers and make it even more illegal. But unfortunately, it's not always the case with everything. Sometimes you have to think a little bit out the box. Sometimes you have to go a little bit counterintuitive to find the solutions which work. Thank you very much. Yes.
There's one thing I disagree with you.
Yes.
I think it actually is intuitive. I honestly have got to the point where I can't actually argue with people how I can't actually disagree with you at any level about this is an obvious thing. Like I can see why some people would be a little bit questionable about elephant farming because you have to kill the elephants to get the ivory. But do you see people protesting against sheep shearing?
Vegans.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a very good analogy. In fact, for sheep shearing, sheep actually need to be shorn in some cases. But look, I think the fact of the matter is that we have this tendency to think if something is bad, we should make it illegal and the problem will go away. Well, that happened wonderfully in the 1920s with alcohol. It's happening wonderfully now in the US with drugs, and I think the same holds true for this. Yes, Russell.
Thanks for a great talk. It's a topic that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I'm very passionate about this topic because it would be devastating to see the black rhino and potentially the white rhino go extinct, one of the great African animals. And you know, when you think about prohibitions and the emergence of contraband and things like this, I agree with Nick. I think that these solutions are, Nick, you asked the question, these solutions are very intuitive. And I think if you lay out, for example, the drug legalization case to people, or rhino horn legalization, I think it's barring the odd, very firm ethical position that someone might take in a certain context, which would be, I think, too rigid and unyielding. It's basically kind of a no-brainer type thing, and that's why my concern, unfortunately, with this kind of stuff is that it's too profitable for the people who are involved in, people that benefit from the ban, right?
Yeah.
So the war on drugs, creates huge benefit for bureaucrats, drug dealers, cronies who are in on the trade. The same with rhino horn. You'll have triads and syndicates in Asia that will benefit tremendously from the scarcity and the price increase that it causes. I don't have any proof of this, but I'd be extremely surprised if local politicians were not involved in rhino trade in some way. and it's less of a question. It's just maybe has some thoughts on this, maybe anyone else has some thoughts on this, but it's a comment on the fact that the barrier to actually getting this done is the special interests that benefit, and I wonder if a rule on this kind of stuff is not that things will be banned if they're kind of non-necessities, and they can be and they can have some sort of faux moral case sort of cased around them. So drugs tick that box, rhino horn kind of ticks that box, and it creates these perfect little enclaves of protected industry for kind of special interests. So interesting thoughts.
I think it's a very good point. Unfortunately, I think many of the policies, we as libertarians would like to see are not going to happen anytime soon, at least in South Africa. It's just a bit of an unfortunate fact I've personally resigned myself to. But I think the point of this presentation here is I'd like to put the case forward in very simple terms so that you guys can go out and tell people now. In terms of practicality, I will say this. From my experience of being good friends now with a game farmer, it very much seems to me like the people in the business of conservation, people trying to save these animals are in favor of this. So I think the problem that we have right now is there's a big disconnect between the politicians who think they know what's going on in the rural areas and the rural areas where the farms and the conservationists are not being able to contact the politicians. Of course, cronyism, as you mentioned, is going to come into play, and I'm not really sure what the answer of that is, to be perfectly honest, except that I really hope we can have the integrity to elect people who will, not become subject to that. That's kind of all I have to say to that, unfortunately. Yes. Yes.
Thanks for this talk. The only message that I know about conservation of land, like rhinos and animals and all that, I've heard more of the like people who say that hunting is evil and all this kind of thing.
See point.
Yes. So I think that your talk has educated me a lot. I will say that perhaps Utemba will agree with me when I say that people, let me say black people, are not very educated when it comes to, we have a strange relationship with animals. So I've never even thought about that much of what you said. Yeah. But going forward, I'll think more about it, because I saw more pictures of the blooded rhinos killed, that have been pushed and killed, unfortunately, than like what you just presented now. So I'm glad that I came, and I'm glad that you educated me this much.
Yes. Well, my pleasure. My pleasure, and I'll just quickly respond to that by saying the reason I am very passionate about this, and Russell says he's also very passionate, and I suspect it might be similar, is because I've been going up to the Lowveld to observe game at the Kruger Park, that kind of area. And it's a really special thing to see these animals in the wild. I think it's a wonderful thing that this country has, and we need to look after it as a part of our heritage. But I can't really make any more big of an argument than that, besides I think it's really special. I've got a few. Yes, Temba.
Yeah. Minister Edna Molewa, she is the conservation minister or something. Conservation minister, environmental.
That's too many departments.
Yeah. I've seen her commenting on the situation of the rhino and his position right now, its status right now, and the fact that it's so vulnerable, and the government seems important in terms of containing, the poaching of the rhino. Now, I haven't seen her for quite a while, but what I do recall about her is that she's always been an open-minded person. Yeah. And that she's not the kind of person who will say, well, let me consult with my colleagues and so on. Once she's brought into an idea or principle, that she will be the one to champion the cause and so on. So my suggestion would be that you consider putting together a presentation along the lines of what you've just done, You know, this is just so good. I once read an article, a paper that was written by, I think it was Michael Sass-Rolfers or someone, titled Saving the Rhino. And that was good, but what you've done now, just this presentation for just this short period of time is really powerful. And I bet you that if you were to have access to her and you did the presentation, just this presentation, what she might halfway buy into it or completely. And that if she did so, then you could be sure that over time it will translate into actual policy. So consider that.
Well, I would be more than happy to do that, but I think what would actually be even better is there are a few farming associations. For example, I know the Eastern Cape best because that's where I live at the moment in Grahamstown. I think it would be lovely if people, farming associations, farmers are actually there, maybe could do this because they know even more than
the point about you is that you
Yeah.
would not be perceived as a vested interest.
Oh, okay, well.
Somebody who's applied his mind to this and so
Yeah.
on. It really would be good.
I will certainly consider that. And if the MEC of whatever this is in the Eastern Cape is watching this video, I live in Grahamstown, please contact me sometime. Yes.
Two things. First, I'd like to add that here, Edma, said, because a short while ago in Lufthansa, I think it was British Airways as well, some other European airline companies refused, under public pressure, to transport trophies.
Oh, really?
Which, if you show them, it's a problem for the South African hunting industry. She got on a plane and flew to Germany. She met all of the airlines there and got them to actually change their policies around it, effectively saving the trophy hunting industry in South Africa. So I would also, on that note, urge you to.
I'd like to suggest that with the advent of Skype, that's a big waste of government funds. But nonetheless, good job, I suppose.
The hunters were quite appreciative of it, just considering government spent so much time to take away their right.
I'll take one more. Lauren.
Hi, again, thanks for the speech. I do tend to agree with that, quite a pragmatic solution. My question is a bit different. I was just wondering whether you could account for the slight drop-off in numbers of rhinos poached over the past 24 months or so.
Yes, I don't exactly know why, but it so happens that I think this year, early this year or last year, I can't remember now. It was 2016. They legalized domestic sale of rhinos, of rhino horn. So whether or not that's the reason why, I don't know, but I think it did happen around that same time. It could also be because there are just fewer rhinos. They're becoming more scarce. Yes, yeah.
It's also just worth the stats on rhino poaching are a little. There's a margin for error there that I would just take.
Absolutely.
So it's a good question. I think if you saw a few years of a strongly declining trend, then that would speak to the decline. 1 year coming off, given the margin for error on the stats, I'd say that the threats are still clearly very high.
Looks like a bubble phenomenon for me with the market correction.
Also, just by the nature of the animals, they are not bound by international borders. Certainly not with, for example, Mozambique, where the Kruger Park and I actually don't know the name of the one on the Mozambican side, but it can be a little bit difficult to keep track of these. In any case, I feel like I've run out of time. I don't know how much time I have.
I was giving you time because
Okay,
just technical issues which I've just fixed.
Well, let's. Okay, yes.
So I've got a lot in common with you. I grew up most of my life going to a game park at least once a year, more up in the Highveld, and up in Zim as well, in Botswana. An uncle of mine used to, he was the head ranger in Pilanesberg National Park, used to be out in sand parks, then went to go and work for Botswana, and now works for USAID. And a worrying trend we see there is South African parks selling their rhinos to Botswanan parks, because Botswana's using the army to protect the rhinos.
Oh, really?
But now you're having a little arms race between the poachers who are picking off the easy pickings here. As soon as they become slim enough and you have a concentration of animals in Botswana and the price goes high enough, you basically have rhino wars going on. But it was interesting that the guys within sand parks are actually quite pro-hunting as well. So even within the national structures, they're trying to lobby government to do the same thing.
Yeah, geez, I haven't been aware of that at all, but I think that simply speaks to the simple economic effects of what happened when something becomes scarce. And once again, I think the knee-jerk reaction is to just put as much manpower to protect these animals, and it's all for, the mindset is good and the motivation is there. But unfortunately, one needs to do an economic impact assessment and ask how's the price going to increase rather. And what are the effects of this going to be? I was not aware of that personally, but I think it does speak to the economic effects which we now face as trouble. In any case, I think I'm out of time, so thank you very much.